Hi, folks. I am calling by my phone because for some reason my microphone is not working. Please let me know if you can hear me now by writing something in the chat or raising your hands. Okay, it's like Sean can hear me. Anyone else? All right. So I'm assuming you can hear me now. I apologize. I don't know what's up with my computer. So just some quick housekeeping before we get started. We are, everyone is muted unless you have something you want to say, and you can just raise your hand and I will answer you. Oh, thank goodness, people can hear me now. If any questions at all, we can either type or talk. The next piece is if you want to hide your control panel, you just hit the arrow over button. You can mute or unmute your line. You can change how it looks on the screen, or you can raise your hand if you have any questions. All right, just type a question in the question panel, and that should work perfectly. Okay. And if you have any questions, you can just email me at education@locomotion.org. All right, so for those of you who may be new to us, Locomotion is Vermont's statewide advocate for active transportation. We really just want to make it easier and safer for people to walk and bike in Vermont. So today we're talking about a bike rodeo. Now, you don't necessarily, you may not be here to do a bike rodeo. Maybe you just, want to learn a little bit more about bikes and bike safety and walk safety, and to be able to educate your community. Maybe you'll be doing presentation style more than activities. So this is a broader range of information than just how to do a bike rodeo. So let's talk a little bit about why we even care. So in 1969, 50% of American kids walked a bike to school, and 90% of them within a mile walked a bike to school. Today, that number is fewer than 15%. And the reasons for that are pretty complicated, but they're also pretty simple. One is increased traffic. Traffic has increased. It's gotten faster. Speed limits have increased. People are commuting on residential roads or using residential roads as pass-throughs to get to work. So they are less residential roads and more used for actual commuting, which makes people behave less safely on those roads. You'll see, and because of this lack of safety, you'll see a big jump in commuting in traffic during the beginning of school hours. And I'm sure all of you are very familiar with the hassles for your work involving traffic and people in congestion. In addition, and I know this isn't really part of your job, but I'm sure is of at least some interest to you, childhood obesity has increased enormously since the 1960s. So kids are walking and biking less, and they're less physically fit. Now, this is correlation, not causation, but we are seeing that kids are less active now than they used to be. So we have a problem of kids not feeling safe on the roads, their families not feeling safe on the roads. Kids are walking and biking less. People are driving more. So let's just now talk about, why the safety component of all this. So parents are not crazy about, why they're not letting their kids walk a bike. Motor vehicle deaths are a leading cause of death for people between the ages of 1 and 45 about. Unintentional injury, this is that stat, contains motor vehicle crashes, and that includes being in a vehicle, but it also includes crashes involving pedestrians and bicyclists as well. And unintentional injury is a broad category. It contains a lot of stuff. So you can see that motor vehicle traffic, being, walking or biking, being a pedestrian makes up these death numbers. This is just for ages 5 to 9, but if you click on the graphs for just about all of those age cohorts, this is how the graph would look, except for, if you care, if you're a data wonk, the people 1 through 4, the top line is actually drownings, and then only slightly smaller is motor vehicle crashes. So this is over 10 years. Obviously, we don't get 9,000 deaths of just children in 1 year. But motor vehicle deaths are not a small number, as I'm sure you well know. They range between 30 and 40,000 a year. So it's a lot. So what drives these fatality rates? As you well know, distracted driving is a big piece, distracted walking and distracted biking. But one of the biggest predictors of a fatality or injury is the speed of the vehicle. So at 20 miles per hour, 90% of the people in the crash will survive, and 10% will die. The 60% survival rate, 40% fatality rate at 30 miles an hour. 40 miles an hour it drops to 20% survival rate, 80% fatality rate. These percentages change depending on what study you look at, but they hover around these numbers. Crash fatality rates are higher for vulnerable populations like older adults or young children, and less high for less fragile populations like adults under the age of 50. So speeding is a big deal. Having it has a big piece for why things aren't safe. So we're going to teach kids and, hopefully their parents how to be safe on the road. Now, one of the things I like to talk about is the perception of law-abiding behavior between motorists and bicyclists and pedestrians. Turns out that humans behave the same no matter what mode they're using. It's in all of the research I was looking through, unsafe transportation behavior happens at around 30% in every single mode people use. If you're driving a vehicle, if you're walking, or if you're biking. And 100% of people make a legally and safety questionable choice. So as you can see on this little excerpt, about 100% of essentially 100% of the sample population admitted to some form of law breaking in the transportation system. And so like everyone breaks the law, whether it's speeding, it's running a red light, whether it's jaywalking or crossing against the light, that kind of thing. I think it's that same jaywalking. So we all make dangerous choices. Failure to yield to pedestrians in a crosswalk is a very high incident rate for motorists. Takes a long time for an unmarked crosswalk for somebody to crash. And even when pedestrians are using the proper infrastructure like a crosswalk, about 20 to 30% of crashes happen at a marked intersection where it's supposed to be safer. So the long story short of all this is that everybody breaks the law at some point when they're driving, and good. Okay. So everyone breaks the law. I was just reading. Somebody said they couldn't hear something. And we perceive bicyclists as breaking the law more, but it's because there are fewer people on bike, and because their presence on the road is not something we notice, and because a certain amount of law breaking has been normalized on the road with motor vehicles, we just tend to pay more attention to law breaking by people on bike. Okay. So let's talk about just how to be safer when we're riding or walking on the road. So the Triad of Safety is to be visible, to be predictable, and to be aware. So because our roads are not designed well for people on foot and on bike, they are designed mostly to make it safer and more efficient for motor vehicles. It can be easier for folks to be safe if they just pay attention to their surroundings. All right. So when you're walking with a child, make sure you are supervising the young kids. They are just not cognitively ready to make good decisions until they are around 9 to 10. Many kids are just not good at understanding what the edges of a road is. So there's a curb, which counts as an edge of a road, but sometimes when there's a secondary edge, so there's the curb, but then there's a parked car, and that counts as an edge because the driver can't see the child behind the car. So teach children to anticipate all of the edges. Have kids look both left, right, and then left again here in America because to make sure they have checked for any oncoming cars before they cross into the road. While you're crossing, keep scanning left and right to make sure somebody hasn't turned a corner really quickly. And always do that scan even at the second edge. So you might do the scan at the first edge, like the curb, but then again at the second edge, like on the edge of a bus. Children should walk and not run across the street. Darting out is one of the leading causes of crashes with children. Use sidewalks when they are available. Walk facing traffic when there are no sidewalks. So kids should be on the sidewalks. Sidewalks are excellent pedestrian infrastructure. They are very safe for people walking and are designed for that safety. So if there's a sidewalk, you should be on it. If there are no sidewalks, walk facing traffic. All right. Walk straight across the roadway. Don't take a diagonal trip that makes the roadway take longer. Any exposure in the center of the roadway is exposure to potentially dangerous interactions with vehicles. So you want to make that trip as short as possible without running. So no diagonal routes, those are longer. Cross at appropriate locations. So for example, crossing between parked vehicles or at the crest of a hill where there's little visibility is dangerous. The driver is not expecting to see you, and the stopping distance of a vehicle is really long. So especially if the car is going fast. But as you well know, the faster the car goes, the longer it takes for it to stop. So kids should not be crossing where there's low visibility for someone crossing. So for example, in this photo, you can see this is a blind hill. If someone is crossing near the crest of that hill, right below it, a vehicle coming over the top of it would have almost no time to stop. So teach kids to cross as far below the impeded visibility section as they can. All right. Be aware of multiple threat situations. So if you're crossing and you haven't made sure both sides of the road have stopped, then you run the danger of being hit by a vehicle coming from the other direction. So wait until all vehicles in all lanes and in all directions have stopped, including at intersections. Pay attention to those bus blind spots. You can check out this image. You can see all the different blind spots on a bus. Children should walk at least 5 feet straight up from a bus doorway and then walk around 10 feet around in front of the bus. That'll make sure the bus driver can see them. That'll give the bus driver enough time to react if a motorist makes the illegal and dangerous choice to pass a bus, which happens shockingly frequently. I don't understand how that happens. And children should never cross behind the school bus because the driver cannot see them. Crosswalks should be utilized cautiously and always even at a crosswalk, because as I said before, a significant number of crashes happen at crosswalks. They need to do the same look left, right, left again before crossing. And if you're at an intersection, you should look for vehicles coming from behind you before crossing that intersection. Be visible at night, wear reflective gear, or at least carry a flashlight, something to illuminate you. I was walking with my husband and my dogs one time, and we were lit up, and somebody almost drove into the back of us before they came to their senses. It was quite scary. They had crossed the line in their lack of attention. I have mixed feelings about this next one because I am hearing impaired, but you should avoid barriers to hearing. Just to give you another sensory input to the safety situation. Now, I'm hearing impaired. I don't hear very well, so I utilize other strategies in order to stay safe while I'm crossing a road. I use a lot of visual cues. When I'm biking, I have a mirror. I check my mirror with the same level of frequency that I check my mirrors when I'm driving. Pretty much a constant kind of rotation, so that if I miss a sound, I'm not surprised. Observe the pedestrian signals. Don't cross if the red hand is up or it says don't walk. And never ever chase objects onto streets. All right, bike safety. We're gonna, you'll probably want to do these at your Bike Rodeo. I have what I call the 2-finger rule. So you put 2 fingers together and put them above your eyebrow. Your helmet should touch your top finger. It should not be any higher than that. Most crashes are forward facing, so you really want the front of your head protected. You want your ear straps to fit like a V under your earlobe, and you should only be able to get 2 fingers under the chin. You don't want it to be any less than that because it's uncomfortable to wear, but you certainly don't want it to be more than that because that causes the helmet to shift. Helmets do lose their effectiveness when they're banged hard or are in a crash. So they're basically a single-use item. They're like car seats. Once they've been in a crash, they go in the trash. If they're dented or damaged, they should be replaced. Now, there is an expiration date on helmets, but it turns out that there have been some pretty robust studies that say that helmets retain their crash prevention abilities really for a very long time. They took an old helmet from the 1970s and they did crash tests on that. They've done crash tests on multiple quote-unquote expired helmets, they are fine. The expiration date is based on old science. But one thing to talk about with helmets, though. So helmets are tested and designed for crashes between the person riding the bike and a stationary object like the ground or a tree. If you take a look at how the testing is designed, they basically put the helmet on a styrofoam head and put it on a machine that basically drops it onto an anvil and replicating the crash forces of an object against the ground. They are not as useful for protecting you in a motor vehicle crash. Now, wear a helmet. Wear a helmet because it is way better than nothing. They mostly protect against skull fractures. They don't do a great job against brain damage, but skull fractures are nasty. You don't want them. We are 100% wear those helmets. I just like to dispel the myth of the helmet as this panacea protect all. It doesn't. It has very limited utilities based on very limited tested environments, and it is not expected to protect anyone in a motor vehicle crash. So when there's a motor vehicle crash and it's reported that the bicyclist was not wearing a helmet, honestly, that helmet wouldn't have helped much in that crash. It's not a very useful piece of information. Now, the bicyclist behavior, what they were doing while they were biking is important, as was the speed of the motorist and the attentiveness of the motorist. But helmet use in a motor vehicle crash is of limited helpfulness. They will protect your head a little, but they're not tested for motor crashes. All right. Bike safety again. So how to fit a kid properly for a bike. You really want to make sure children are not fit the way you would fit an adult. When you fit an adult to a bike, you make sure that on the downstroke, the knee is slightly bent and but almost fully extended. If you do that with a kid, it's too high and they look like they're biking on stilts. You definitely want to make sure their knees are more bent. Basically, they need to be able to touch the ground pretty easily while they're sitting on the seat. Otherwise, their stopping is going to be messy. All right. Then, of course, make sure your bike is safe when you are riding it. Check to make sure that the tire is full of air, the brakes work, and that the chain rolls smoothly. So the way I have kids check for air is I push down on the part of the tire that touches the ground, and I push down on it, and it shouldn't go down more than a half inch. Like at a half inch, it's like too soft. A soft tire makes for a very slow, sloppy, uncomfortable, mushy ride, and you can risk getting a pinch flat on your tire, and that's a bummer. B is for brakes. You check to make sure both your front and rear brakes are working by squeezing first one brake and pulling forward, and then squeezing the other brake and pulling forward, and just making sure each of those individual wheels are stopping well enough. If a kid has one of those coaster brakes where you pedal backwards, have them ride for a second on a flat surface and then pedal backwards to make sure it works, or you can turn the bike upside down and pedal it backwards and make sure it stops. Again, checking your chain, pedal backwards. You shouldn't hear any grinding or crunching or clicking. Again, for those bikes where the brake is a back pedal bike, you may either have to lift it up by the seat and spin it forward without the rear wheel touching the ground, or you have to turn the bike over and pedal it forward. All right, ride right with traffic. Walk left, ride right. People who are on bikes should be riding in the direction of traffic and pointing in the same direction as traffic. And most of the rules of the road for motor vehicles are the same for bikes. In some cases, it doesn't quite make sense to do it that way, but that's how the law is. And we always tell people to follow the law, no matter what. And bicyclists will push back on things like stopping at stop signs and stoplights, especially when there's no other traffic. There are other states that have removed the stop sign and stoplight law, where you just you treat a stop sign like a yield sign, and you treat a stoplight like a stop sign, and they actually have higher safety records than most of the other states. And it's because, of course, bikes are people powered, and if you have to stop and then there's a hill, it's kind of a bummer. That said, that is not what the law says, and we say stop at stop signs and stoplights, because that is the rule, and people do not like it when they see bikes blowing through stop signs and stoplights. And it's, and people who blow through it, that is unsafe. And we make sure to tell people that you need to pay attention to traffic at all times and stop and make sure there's no one coming. All right, hand signals. Stop. These are the original hand signals were developed from before cars had turn signals, and the only arm you could make visible was the left-hand arm. So that one is why, the arm bent up is right. Now, kids have a hard time with left and right sometimes, as do many adults. So I have found that people get a little confused by the right signal on the left hand. It is illegal in Vermont and much simpler to just point in the direction you're going. It's easier for kids, it's easier for motorists, easier for everybody. All right, bike safety again. So how to avoid hazards. Now you'll see sometimes folks riding their bikes on the road, and they'll just suddenly swerve for no reason, and they're not supposed to do that. The reason why they're doing that is because, unlike hitting a pothole with a car or hitting a bunch of loose gravel with a car, where it just sort of gets absorbed by a pretty sophisticated set of suspension and 4 tires, and a bike hitting a pothole or gravel can cause you to fall over. So you'll see people kind of going a little bit away from the right-hand side of the road. They cannot do that if there's a car behind them. That is incredibly unsafe. Now, there is an exception for riding as far to the right as is practicable to avoid hazards, and hazards include potholes, loose gravel, a blind corner, a blind hill, something like that, where it is just unsafe. But a bicyclist has to make sure it is safe to move into the lane before they do it. And that is not always the case. And it is, as a driver, I have been that person who has been behind somebody who just sort of turned, and it was terrifying. Very terrifying. So one of the things we teach is how to look behind you for vehicles before you go into the road to avoid the road hazard. Make eye contact with drivers, and if you're going to ride in the dark, ride with caution. A significant percentage of crashes happen at night. Another significant percentage happens with impairment, of course, but we don't have to worry about that with children. Nighttime riding is not very common because kids are just not as much at liberty to walk or bike unsupervised as they were in the past, but there are kids who are allowed to, and riding at night can be very unsafe if you are not visible. It is also illegal to ride at night without lights. So Vermont law says you need to have a front light and a rear reflector. In Burlington and maybe some other municipalities, you have to have both a front and a rear light if you're riding at night. Okay. So now let's talk a little bit about actual presentation components. We've talked about, the principles behind the safety that we're teaching kids. So now let's talk a little bit about how to run a bike rodeo and some activities you can do to help kids get excited about biking and biking safely. So my biggest suggestion is to find a captive audience, like a school or a camp or an after-school program. Work with your local community. School is a great one. And talk to the PE teacher or the health teacher. It tends to be your person of choice. If you have trouble making that connection, talk to me. I work with PE teachers across the state with my educational programming, and I'm very happy to link folks up. I find that a standalone public event, unless it is heavily publicized, is quite challenging to get attendance at. You can also piggyback on an existing event with an established, relatively satisfying attendance rate. For example, like a kid, youth night or a family fun night. Can work with them to set up an event, like a maritime festival, something like that. Set up a bike rodeo there and kind of have a rolling drop-in component. That one still has a mixed level of attendance in my experience, and your really, truly best bet is to find a school or a camp or an after-school program to just come and have the kids be there. And they're already there because their teachers told them to go there, and there are no problems. The one downside to that is you won't get parents, and it's really nice to also talk to the parents and teach them about safe behavior, because we could all just use across the board more road literacy. Keep it simple. So you can make a pretty intense bike rodeo, and those are fun, but they're a lot of work, and you all are very busy. So my suggestion is to keep it simple. Set up a couple of games, do a little talk, hand out helmets at that event so that people are kind of excited about it, and make your life easier. It has a lot of value, even if you're not handing out prizes or awards or feeding people. It's just a lot, and you have enough to do. Ideally, you would have access to bikes on hand at your event, especially, obviously, if you have an on-bike component. I can help you with that. It tends to be best if we coordinate so that you have your weekend event at the same time, if you do a weekend event, at the same time as the trailer is at a school within your region. So, because I have a fleet of 4 bike trailers. They're 20 feet long. They have 50 kids' bikes in them and a whole bunch of training materials, and they're an amazing resource, but they're fully booked. So you could either take advantage of the Bike Smart trailer being on site at a school you want to work with, and just meet with the school and run a little program there, like as part of my program. Or you could work a weekend event, and we would just sort of figure out when that would work. I love working with folks on community events. Just be aware that my trailer is fully scheduled for a season. If you want to plan ahead for, say, the spring, I generally can work my schedule a little better to accommodate programming for folks. And it's free, by the way, totally free. We are supported by VTrans and other donors, and this is free. So you don't have to worry about paying for a single thing except for staff time for these programs. And if you are running a lot of activities, make sure you have a fair number of adults on hand just to help run the different stations if you decide to do multiple stations. All right. Bike rodeos with COVID. I mean, you already know all this, but it felt like I needed to say it anyway. Keep everything outside. That's the safest place to be right now if you're going to be around other people. Still wear those masks. Avoid physical contact and keep about 6 feet of distance. And one of the things that, you know, everyone has all these clever little, put a cow between you, put a giant beaver between you, I don't know. Here's like a real like one that you can understand. If you put your arm out and they put their arm out, if you can touch fingers, you're too close. Arms are about 3 feet long. It's like, you know, give or take depending on your height. That's a good enough standard. It's easy to remember. All right. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through some fun games because that's why you're here. We have this curriculum guide. It's free. It's available on the web. I'll give you the link to be able to find this and other resources. And it's a games-based, hands-on, fun little series of activities. Oh, and I just got a question from Chris asking if I travel throughout the state. Yes, we are everywhere. I'll show you in a second. Oh, there we go. We are in all 14 counties. We've been in over 70 towns, and I'll go anywhere with this trailer and serve any group of kids. It's a private school, a public school. Most of the groups we serve are public schools, and very rarely private, but it's not that we don't do it. Here's our map of where's Bike Smart, and my internet connection is, of course, being challenging right now. But there you go. There you go. That's where Bike Smart was last in 2018, 2019. Last year, more challenging because we didn't go anywhere in the spring, like just about everyone else in the world. But so the best snapshot is from 2 years ago. So you can see this is just 1 year's worth, and we're in the Northeast Kingdom, we're down in the South. Lots of schools in Franklin and Grand Isle counties. I've been meeting a lot of partners there, working with them, but you can see the center of the state along Windsor and Windham counties. Like, if you ask me for the trailer, I will do my best to get that to you. I can't make any promises, but I will do my best because it is important to me that as many schools as possible have access to the trailers. And we try to give priority to low-income schools in particular because they tend to have a higher need for some of the resources we provide. All right, let's talk a little bit about some of the games you can play. So this curriculum is split into modules based on topic area, and each one has a little activity you can do. So I'm going to scroll quickly through some of the ones that we already covered or you would more likely know. So this first module is all about fitting a helmet, fitting a bike, what to wear, how to make sure your bike is safe, and the rules of the road. And there's just stuff you can talk about and how to teach these activities. This is Module B. This covers starting and stopping. So one of the things around bike safety, it's not just important to know the rules of the road, you also need to know how to handle your bike competently. So if you're being safe and you're stopping at an intersection, you can't be safe if you can't stop well. If you can't start smoothly, you'll wobble into traffic, and that isn't safe. So bike handling skills are an important piece of that work. So this is a fun little module. First, we teach kids how to do a power start. Now, most people do a power start without realizing what it is. I'm hopefully going to be able to show you what a power start is. But basically what it does is it gives you a really good smooth start. And what kids do a lot is, there you go. So what kids do a lot is they just start their bike any old way, and starting with the pedals level really makes for a lot more energy to get moving forward. If you put your pedal up, at 2 or 10, depending on how you're looking at it, you will have a much more powerful start. So you push down on the pedal with one foot and you push off with the other, and that gives you the momentum you need to get your balance going and your bike in a straight line. So that's the power start. Your best bet is to demo that in person so kids can see it. And what you would do is you would have, say, a bunch of cones and set up like a line where they start and where they stop, and you just have them all line up at the base of the alley you've made with the cones, and you say start, and they push off with their power pedal and they get going, and then you tell them to stop a couple of times down the alley, so make sure that alley's pretty long so they get that practice, and then the next kid goes and the next kid goes. You can set up multiple lanes if you have a lot of kids to do, so it's more efficient. And if you have a few adults on hand, they can provide tips to kids. Then you do the anti-lock stop. That's the one where you'll see some kids and they'll stop and they just basically, it's like a falling with style. They just basically fall off the seat of their bike and the bike wobbles all over the place and it basically looks like they fell, even though they're still upright. That is not a good stop. That is an unsafe stop, and we need to teach them how to be in control of their bike, fully in control of their bike when they come to a stop. So they need to, when they brake, they need to squeeze slowly, not quickly. Their weight needs to be pushed back, not forward. And when they do step off the seat, which is fine, you can step off the seat, it needs to be planned, and it needs to be a smooth, controlled coming off of the seat instead of basically they fell off. So again, you would have them go down the lane. You would demonstrate what a good stop looks like, and then you would have them go down the lane and practice stopping, moving their weight back, braking slowly and smoothly. Don't slam on the brakes. That makes for a real problem. And you just shout stop a couple of times during the intervals, and as they get going, you can reinforce their power start as well as they get going again. Then you can play a game. Red light, green light, except with bikes, we all know the rules to red light, green light. The stopping distance for a bike is longer than it is for kids on foot. So what you would do is you would have the kids line up all together, and next to each other at a starting line, just like you would with normal red light, green light. And then it would be green light when you turn your back on them. And then when you turn around again, it's red light, and they need to stop. And it helps to have an assistant to nab those kids who didn't stop right, and you just start back at the beginning of the line. They will fight with you, and you don't have time to do that if you're running the game. So if you have an assistant, that person can be like, nope, I'm sorry, Sarah, you need to go to the beginning of the line and just deal with the kid that way. Because the stopping distance is longer, what I like to do while I have my green light is right before I turn around for the red light, I put my hand up in the air and turn around, and then I say red light, and then I turn around slowly. And this has two benefits. One, it gives kids enough time to stop, and two, it teaches kids to be looking ahead. A lot of kids look at the ground when they bike, and that is both dangerous and hard to balance. This is a really fun game and a great way to reinforce those skills. All right, this is Module key, and this talks about balance and bike control, and it's pretty hard. It starts with a track stand. I'm not even going to teach you what a track stand is. If you want to look it up, you can. I'll describe it. A track stand is when you are on your bike, and your bike isn't moving forward, and you don't have a single foot on the ground, and you're just sort of, basically what you see people doing is sort of chinking their bike back and forth. They're like, choo, 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 like on their pedal, and it's very fancy. I can't do it. I know and I know some people will get nabbed at stop signs for doing a track stand because they don't have a foot on the ground, even though they're completely stopped. They are technically stopped. I think and apparently people think it gives them more momentum and keeps them moving, and I don't agree, but it's a thing. So you don't have to teach a track stand, but slow race is amazing. Kids can really practice their control and balance on their bike for slow race. So basically, the last person across the finish line wins. They cannot put a foot down on the ground. So what you do is, again, you line everyone up. And what I do is I say, get ready, get set, slow, just to remind them that their job is not to be the first one across the line. And the kids have to bike as slowly as possible. They can't go backwards. If they can do a track stand, the rules say you can't, but if you can, go ahead and do that. And you can't go sideways. You have to be going forward. And if a kid puts a foot on the ground because they lost their balance, you tell them to just cross the finish line. That way there's no ambiguity about their behavior. My phone just lit up, so I hope everyone can still hear me. Okay. All right. So hopefully I don't see any, can't hear you. Now, so that's slow race, and slow race is fantastic. It's a great little game. And then you can play a game called Dab, and Dab's another control game. How to keep tight control of your bike when you are riding. Now, I am not sure we will get a chance to see this video. Okay. This is how to play dab or foot down. Basically what you do is you set up a circle. In this case, these guys, and I know they're not wearing helmets, I'm sorry, I had no control over this, and I cannot find a video of dab otherwise. But what they're doing is they're staying within that square, and they're pedaling around, and they're trying not to put a foot down on the ground while they're playing. If they do, they will be disqualified and have to leave the game, or you can also alternatively have them stand still and be an obstacle for other bikers. It's such a slow game that even if kids engage in hijinks like trying to bump into each other, which I am pretty sure these guys are going to do at some point, it's not a real big deal because it's so slow and they're not going to hurt anybody or themselves. So you can see how if somebody puts a foot down, they end up having to leave, or if they leave the circle. It's a fun game. It's a great control activity. Kids like it. If you have kids moving who are really good, like really physically able, then you should shrink the circle and make it harder and harder for them, because you really want this game to have a quick turnaround. What doesn't need to happen is for your most proficient kids to have more time on bike. You need the kids who were, who ended it sooner to be the ones who get the most practice. So you really want that game to turn around quickly. So squeeze that circle smaller and smaller until you have a winner, and then get those kids who need practice back on there. Another really important thing to do is if you have some really distinct ability levels, to set up two different courses. All right, so this one is the most important set of skills that I can set you up with, because this is something that everything's important, but this one is for road riding. And I can't begin to tell you the number of grown adults who cannot do this skill safely. So what this module is called Rock Dodge, but what it is the ability to look behind you for a vehicle before you do something on your bike that will put you in the path of traffic. Now, everyone can look behind them. That's not the problem. The difficulty comes in is looking behind you without taking your bike in the same direction as you are looking, which completely defeats the safety purpose. If you're looking to make sure there isn't a car behind you, and then you put your bike in the path of that car while looking, very dangerous. So what we are teaching people in this activity is how to look behind you without moving your bike in the direction you're looking. And it's hard because you have to turn your whole body, and when you turn your whole body, that very, very responsive handlebar will kind of shift too. So this is a really nice, really important activity. So you demonstrate it. You'll need 2 people to demonstrate this one, or a kid volunteer. So we have printouts of vehicles, and you would set up a cone that's a lane, and the kid would be riding on the right-hand side of the lane like they're supposed to. And you will have them, the person biking will go ahead a little bit, and then there'll be someone behind them holding up a sign. And then the job of the person behind them is to say, look back. And when they look back, you're going to be holding up one of the signs. It's a bus or a car or a different color, whatever. Have them identify the vehicle, then look back on the road without turning their bike into the path of that vehicle. So basically, say you were holding the fire truck, and you're holding that up, and the kid was biking, and you said, look back. They would have to look back and say, fire truck, and then look ahead without their bike swerving into traffic. This is such an important skill. A lot of adults don't have it. It's a really good game. All right, so the next one is for, say you're at an intersection and you're looking for a vehicle. You would come to a complete stop, but you would look back for a vehicle and then signal that you're going to go into the lane to make your turn, especially if you're going to go left, for example, and then shift into that lane and then look back again. So right now they're just looking and signaling. They're combining those 2 skills, but then you can have them go even further, look back, signal, and then make the turn. But your best bet is to break those skills up into little bite-sized chunks so they get good at looking back and signaling. So we started with looking back without turning your handlebars. Now we're practicing looking back and using your arm signal without turning your handlebars. And then you can add on an extra bit where they're looking back, signaling, and then avoiding whatever it is that's in the road, whether it's at an intersection or a pothole or gravel or something. So this is where we get to rock dodge. This is where we bring all those pieces together into one. You, on the right-hand side of the lane, you set up like midway down the course a bunch of sponges and cut up tennis balls. We have one of those little flat dog toys that are like skunks that we put there to pretend to be roadkill. It's whatever it is that somebody would very much not like to run over in their bike. And the kids scan ahead. They see the simulated pothole ahead. They need to look behind them for a vehicle. If there is no vehicle, they then go around the pothole. So you would basically run a couple of scenarios with this. One where the you have the vehicle poster, you're holding it up. So when they look back to see if it's safe, they may have to come to a complete stop until you simulate that the vehicle is gone. And I usually do that by just turning the blank side towards the kid. And that means the vehicle has gone. It is now safe for them to go around the pothole. You could do another one where they look back and it's totally safe. There's no car coming. They signal and then they go around it. You want them to practice the idea, the absolutely radical idea, that you can come to a complete stop in the road if it is not safe to continue. People behind the wheel of cars have trouble with that. People behind handlebars have problems with that. I find that 4-foot vulnerable user passing rule becomes a real challenge for people when they don't realize that they can come to a complete stop in order to give people that safe space. So they'll try to thread the needle, or they'll move into the oncoming lane and terrify the oncoming car and the person on a bike at the same time. So what I like to tell every road user is, if it is not safe, stop and wait until it is. So if you can't pass a person on a bike, or a person walking, or a person in a wheelchair, or a person on a horse with that recommended 4 feet, stop and wait until it is safe, until, say, the vehicle has passed or you have gone over the blind hill. Again, I have seen a lot of, bless them for giving those vulnerable users that space, but don't do it on a blind corner or a blind hill when you have no idea what's coming at you. And the same thing happens with people on bikes. They don't realize that they can stop and that they should stop if it's not safe. So that was my soapbox, but it amazes me how few people are okay with stopping when it is the only safe choice. So let's teach kids. Teaching kids this now, that you can stop, will help them when they're drivers too, right? So a lot of this stuff is transferable. Kids are getting used to behaving on the road. And as they are on the road as kids, they'll be learning the skills that they will use when they are adults driving. And it's a win-win for everyone. So anyway, I really like this module is teaching important life skills. The obstacle course, this one is just about teaching bike handling skills, how to, turn left and right and maintain your balance. You can set up cones for a slalom and have them practice going left and right. You can have them signal as they're going around the cones, slaloming around the cones. That adds an extra level of difficulty. You can squeeze the cones closer together to make the turns sharper. Pro tip: test out your slalom on your bike before having kids go through it. I once made the mistake of thinking the distance was plenty far enough when I did it the first time, and it was impossible. So give it a test. Make sure it feels easy for you. And if it doesn't, spread the cones out enough. And you can, make it harder and harder, like I said, by squeezing them together. It's really nice, fun little activity. If you have younger kids, I have found that you need to run next to them, and you will get your exercise in as they're making their turns around the cones, because they won't understand at first that they're supposed to go around the cones, even if you demonstrate for them. Like I did this once, and I had just a couple of kids zip as fast as they could right next to the cone, and then ended up at the end, and they looked so proud of themselves, and I was like, no. Good job, but no. So you really need to run next to them as they point, and you point them in the direction they're supposed to go around the cone. And once they've done it once, they understand what they're supposed to do. Sorry. This is how to interact with vehicles at an intersection. So we talk about making eye contact with other road users, how to handle right turns and how to handle left turns. I really hammered up at the eye contact piece. So I set up an intersection at a cones, and then I pretend to be the car, and the kid comes up on one part of the intersection, and they're turning, and then there's me, and I've come up to the intersection, and I'm stopped, but I may or may not be paying attention. So I like ham it up. I'll be looking at the sky. I'll pretend to be eating a hamburger because have no dignity whatsoever. I'll pretend to be picking my nose, whatever. They have to wait until I look at them and we make eye contact. They cannot move until there has been eye contact made, and I have seen them, and that is the only time they can then signal and make their turn. If I have made eye contact and then I have waved them on, or or I have been like, shrug and I'll go, because sometimes that's what people in cars do. So teach them how to handle those interactions and have them practice it. And it's fun to ham it up. It's a good moment for those burgeoning actors among you. All right, let's review the rules for the intersection. So you tell them that they have to stop at the stop signs and stoplights, just like cars do. They have to signal their turns, just like cars do. They have to drive. They have to look for oncoming vehicles, just like cars do. Now, right-hand turns are pretty easy, although there are crashes between motor vehicles and bicyclists between people driving cars and people riding bikes at right turns. And though that happens when someone driving a motor vehicle turns it too tight, or runs into the back of the person. There's lots of, even though it's one of the safer turns, it still has a problem. So again, when you're making a right turn, you signal that you're making a right turn. And again, I suggest pointing. Taking a hand off the right-hand brake means you're letting go of the rear brake, which is the friendlier brake. You don't want to just be only holding on to the front brake at really any point ever. So what I suggest with kids who have limited coordination is when they get to the intersection, that's when they've stopped, that's when they signal. They don't try to start signaling before they get to the stop sign unless they have much better control over their bikes than most kids do. It's a tip. So then you have them practice. You're the car. Again, you make sure there's eye contact. The child signals, and then they make their right-hand turn. And those are pretty uncomplicated. Left turns are a lot more complicated. It means you have to cross a lane of traffic. And there are two ways you can teach it. One is the way I would choose to teach younger children who have developmentally just fewer skills and resources for making complex safety decisions. The field of vision is narrower. Their ability to evaluate multiple threats is much more limited. Their perception of speed of an oncoming vehicle is very different from what reality is. They just don't understand just a lot of that. So I suggest that for younger children, that they do a left turn by becoming a pedestrian. They get off their bike, they cross at a crosswalk, across the street, then they turn 90 degrees, cross at the second crosswalk, make sure that it's safe, and they get back on their bikes, and they've gone left. It was a few more steps, but because they're so young and developmentally unable to make the kinds of decisions you and I can make much more easily, that's what we suggest. The other way to make a left-hand turn is my favorite way as an older person, not a child, not a young child. So if you have a kid who is, older, 9 or 10 and up, you can have them practice taking the lane. Now, taking the lane is a really nice way of handling really any intersection. This is a legal gray area because you're supposed to be as far to the right as it's practicable, unless there's a safety reason. For me, the safety reason is I need all the vehicles to see me. So whenever I'm at any intersection, I go into the lane, and I don't cut in front of all the cars because that's obnoxious. I file in, filter into the lane when it's my turn. So, for example, if there were 3 cars ahead of me at the stop sign, I just get behind that 3rd car, and now I'm in the lane. And so I'm not going to come to the front of the line and then get in front of all the cars. That's not okay. It'll get people mad. But if I'm in the lane starting there, that sets me up for when I get to the intersection, I'm right there. All the cars can see me. All the people coming from all the directions. The cars behind me can see me. The cars in front of me. Everyone can see me. I make my signal. I want to turn left or I want to go straight. I make my turn, and then I move back to the right-hand side of the lane where I'm supposed to be now that the danger is past. So you have kids practice taking left-hand turns. So again, you would either have them practice getting off their bikes and crossing like a pedestrian, cross crosswalks, or you could have older kids practicing taking the lane. And this last one is just going on a field trip, which I don't think you will be doing. But if you do, there's a really nice recap on how to do it safely. And the only thing I would add to this that isn't on here is make sure you know the kids' names and that you bring more adults than you think you need, because there's always that borderline child that people said, well, let's give them a chance. They might do well, or they might not do well. And in the situation in which that child makes bad choices, you want to be able to remove them from the biking field trip without ruining everyone else's good time. That means everyone turn around, or you have to put up with this kid who is just not being safe at all on the road. All right, so that's basically some fun games you could do if you wanted to do actual on-bike activities with kids. Does anyone have any questions for me? All right, so if you come up with anything, thanks, Jason. I will keep checking that, but what I'm going to do is sort of point you to some of the other resources that I want to let you know about. So this right here is an organizer's guide to bicycle rodeos. It is super comprehensive. If you want to run a very exhausting bike rodeo, this is your best bet. It's a great resource. Like I said, keep things simple. So I would not choose to do this if I were you, but if you are really into this idea, this is an amazing resource for doing a full-on, complete, full package bike rodeo. Let me see. Our Bike Smart resources. So we have our trailer, which I told you about, and we also have pretty much our full fleet of biking education resources. So this is the curriculum that I just walked you through. This is a more advanced curriculum for middle and high school age students, for those of you who are interested in sort of stepping things up a bit. This is the trailer manual if you end up working with me to get the Bike Smart trailer. And these are just teacher resources, which you wouldn't want to use, but you might want the send home letter as a template if you wanted to give that to a teacher you were working with to help them with follow-up or prep for your thing, for your presentation. Finally, I wanted to introduce you to a couple of resources you might want. A Parent's Guide to Safe Bicycling Essentials. We have this. It's a really, really nice resource. It's dedicated to a little girl who lived in South Burlington who was struck and killed by a neighbor on the sidewalk. One thing I do want to sort of talk a little bit about is the importance of infrastructure. Sidewalks are pedestrian infrastructure. They are not designed for bikes. the line of sight distances and the stopping distances and the obstructions are more designed for the extremely low speed traffic of pedestrians. When you put a bicycle, the bicycle has you lower to the ground. It has you moving faster. There's a lot of line of sight issues. Teaching kids to treat, I understand why kids are on sidewalks. They're wobbly, inconsistent, and they have poor judgment. I get it. But if you're going to have a kid on a sidewalk, they need to stop at absolutely every single driveway, every single parking lot, and every single intersection, because cars are not looking for bikes. People in cars are not looking for people on bikes on the sidewalk. And this is where a significant number of crashes happen. It happened here. Really horrible story. Anyway, this book itself is an amazing resource. So the parents took their tragedy and they really created an amazing resource for parents. And it walks through how to, be aware of cars and look ahead, scan ahead for hazards. Look at this. Sidewalk and path riding, how to handle that, how to communicate with drivers, how to be predictable. This is a really nice resource, and we will give those to you for free. And we'll give you as many as you want for free. It's fantastic. We also have, for folks who are interested, a couple of little handouts to give to folks. Fun little flyer called Keep Your Bike Upside Down, and it just covers the big rules of the road that involve safety. There's a lot of bike laws. Some of them are pretty niche, like, don't hang on to a vehicle while you're biking. Everyone knows they're not supposed to do that, and not a lot of people do it. You know who does it. It's not most people. And or it's like, don't lock your bike to trees. So they have their uses. They're valuable. And also, we wanted to focus on the biggest, most important rules that keep people safe. And then also, and I think you would appreciate this, how to lock your bike so it doesn't get stolen. Now, one thing that isn't on this list that I like to say is, if you're locking your bike for long term, hide it. So if you're at your house, do not put it on the front porch. Like, why? It's handy. Put it in a shed or in your basement or in your hallway where someone can't see it and go yoink. So anyway, we have those, and they're for free as well. We will give you as many of those as you want. There also exists, because I kept mentioning things like cones and stuff. There do exist some Bike Rodeo kits, although now that I'm thinking about it, they don't really have cones. But across the state, there are some Bike Rodeo kits that I do not manage, and they may or may not be in good repair. I would really just suggest you talk to me, and we will work something out if you need supplies to do a Bike Rodeo. We do not run Bike Rodeos ourselves. We are doing other things that we just don't have enough staff time to do it, but we will support you in your bike presentation or Bike Rodeo to whatever background work extent you need from us. All right. Any other questions? Look, we're almost done early. So what I'm going to do is send you a follow-up email to all of you who participated. An email with how to claim those 24 bike helmets that you received for attending this. Now, I got this through the Behavioral Safety Unit, which means that these helmets need to be distributed as part of an educational program. So you could distribute them at a rodeo, or if you did a bike presentation, or honestly, and this counts as long as you're tracking it or paying attention, if you meet a kid who doesn't have a helmet and you happen to have a stash of helmets in your car, you hand the kid a helmet and you walk through some basic safety components while you're talking to them. That counts as a safety outreach thing. As long as safety is mentioned, discussed at some point, it doesn't matter if it was to a whole group or to an individual, that's fine. That's my only stipulation for these helmets. So that I'm going to be sending out a form to get the address you want them mailed to, what sizes you're looking for. And I know you probably won't know, but maybe you only want little kid helmets, or maybe you want adult helmets. I don't care. Just let me know. And I will also follow up with a link to this presentation so you can get any data from it that you saw and want to have again, and also to the resources that I have. All right, I think that's it for today. I don't see any questions at all. All right. Thank you all so much for attending. I'm looking forward to working with you in the future.